Catherine Sterling did not deal in sentiment. She dealt in leveraged buyouts, asset stripping, and the cold, hard arithmetic of shareholder value. Her world was the 49th floor of a glass and steel monolith that stabbed the sky over the city, a world of hushed carpets, whispered stock tips, and the quiet hum of a server farm processing billions of dollars in transactions. From this perch, she surveyed her empire, Sterling Holdings, a sprawling portfolio of industrial properties, tech startups, and logistical networks. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument for identifying and excising inefficiency, moved across a glowing monitor displaying a list of what her chief financial officer called peripheral liabilities. These were the barnacles on the hull of her corporate warship, insignificant drains on capital that, when aggregated, represented a correctable flaw in her otherwise perfect machine. Her manicured finger, the nail a slash of crimson against the white screen, tapped on a line item, Industrial Lot 7B, Ashcroft Garage. The data was sparse. A small, brick-and-mortar structure in a forgotten industrial park on the city's fringe. Annual property taxes, $4,000. Insurance, $1,200. Utility costs, minimal. It had been acquired as part of a larger portfolio purchase years ago, a rounding error in a 9-figure deal. The previous owner, a man named Silas Ashcroft, had died, and the property had reverted to the holding company that Sterling eventually absorbed. It was, in the language of her world, dead weight. A non-performing asset. Junk. David, she said, her voice cutting through the engineered silence of the office. It was not a question, but a summons. David Chen, her assistant, materialized at her elbow, a tablet held at the ready. He was young, sharp, and perpetually clad in a suit that was almost as expensive as hers, yet somehow looked a decade older on him. He lived in a state of managed anxiety, anticipating her needs, deflecting her moods. The Ashcroft property, she stated, not looking at him. It's costing us over $5,000 a year to exist. What is our disposal protocol for an asset of this class? David swiped through his tablet. Standard procedure would be to list it with a commercial realtor, targeting small business owners or investors looking for development potential. We could expect a sale within 6 to 9 months, likely in the low 6-figure range, depending on zoning assessments. Catherine made a sound of profound impatience, a sharp exhalation through her nostrils. 6 to 9 months. David, I don't have that kind of time for a rounding error. This is a distraction. The carrying costs are an insult. The time my legal team would spend on it is a greater insult. Liquidate it. Now. Put it up for an as-is cash sale. No inspections, no warranties, no lengthy closing. First person to show up with a certified check for whatever the scrap value of the land is gets the keys. I want it off our books by the end of the month. Ma'am, the structure itself might have value. We've never done a formal appraisal. The value, Catherine interrupted, finally turning her ice-blue eyes on him, is in its absence from my balance sheet. I don't care if they pay us $1,000. I don't care if they pay us $500. Just make the problem disappear. She turned back to her screen, the conversation, and the Ashcroft garage, already deleted from her memory. David Chen, sensing the finality in her tone, simply nodded. Yes, ma'am. He backed away, the command already translating into a series of emails and calls. He felt a familiar, dull pang of unease. It was efficient, yes. But it felt like breaking a tool simply because you were too impatient to learn how to use it. Miles away, in a world of oil-stained concrete and the quiet dignity of well-ordered tools, Elias Vance was meticulously reassembling the carburetor of a vintage lawnmower. His garage, attached to a modest bungalow on a quiet street, was less a workspace and more a sanctuary. Every wrench, every socket, every screwdriver had its place, hanging in a neat silhouette on a pegboard wall. The floor was swept clean, and the air smelled of solvent and metal, a scent he found more comforting than any cologne. Elias worked with an unhurried, deliberate grace. His hands, calloused and scarred, moved with the precision of a surgeon's. He was a man of few words, his silence often mistaken for simplicity, his calm demeanor for a lack of ambition. People in his neighborhood knew him as the quiet single father who could fix anything, the man to call when an appliance sputtered its last or a bicycle chain snapped. He rarely charged for his time, finding satisfaction enough in the clean click of a well-seated bearing or the smooth hum of a properly tuned engine. His daughter, Lily, sat at a small, sturdy wooden desk he had built for her in the corner of the garage. At 8 years old, she possessed her father's serious, observant nature. She was not drawing cartoons or princesses, but carefully sketching the intricate gears of a disassembled clock that lay on a cloth beside her. She did not chatter or demand attention, content to exist in the same quiet sphere of concentration as her father. She was his entire world, the anchor that held him to this simple, predictable life. Her presence was the reason his world was this garage and not a sterile design lab in Stuttgart or a roaring racetrack in Monaco. The lawnmower engine coughed to life with a single, gentle pull of the cord, settling into a steady, contented rhythm. Elias listened to it for a long moment, his head tilted, diagnosing the sound. He made a minute adjustment to a screw, and the rhythm smoothed into perfection. Satisfied, he shut it down. He wiped his hands on a clean rag, the motion as practiced and methodical as the repair itself. His phone buzzed on the workbench. He glanced at the screen. Marcus Thorne. He answered. Elias, Marcus's voice came through, warm and familiar. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just finishing a Briggs & Stratton, Elias replied, his voice a low rumble. Still saving the neighborhood's neglected machinery, I see. Listen, I saw something that made me think of you. A commercial property listing. It's an as-is cash sale, being offloaded by some big holding company. Probably nothing, but the name caught my eye. The Ashcroft Garage. Elias went still. The name was a key, unlocking a door to a part of his life he had sealed shut years ago. Before he was just Lily's father, before the quiet bungalow and the neighborly repairs, he had been Elias Vance, protege to the legendary Silas Ashcroft. Ashcroft had not been a mechanic, he had been an artist who worked in aluminum and steel, a reclusive genius who built bespoke automobiles for a handful of the world's most discerning collectors. His garage was not a place of repair, but of creation. And Elias had been his right hand, his lead engineer, the one person who could translate Ashcroft's visionary sketches into functioning, mechanical poetry. He had been on the verge of a brilliant career, a name whispered with reverence in the most exclusive automotive circles. Then, the accident. A drunk driver had taken his wife, Elena, and shattered his world. The high-pressure, globe-trotting life of a top-tier automotive designer became not just unappealing, but impossible. His only priority was the small, fragile life that depended on him completely. He had walked away from it all without a second thought, trading the roar of a V12 engine for the quiet breathing of his sleeping daughter. He packed up his expertise, his patents, his reputation, and stored them away like old tools he never expected to use again. He chose obscurity as a shield, a way to build a small, safe world for Lily. Elias. You there? Marcus's voice broke the silence. I'm here, Elias said, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. Ashcroft's place. I thought it was torn down years ago. Apparently not. Sterling Holdings owns it now. They're practically giving it away. Looks like they just want to dump it. The listing is for 72 hours. I know it's a long shot, but I remember the stories you told about the place. About the work you two were doing. Elias looked across the garage at Lily, who was now carefully reassembling the clock, her small fingers mimicking the movements she had watched him make 1,000 times. He thought of the endless nights spent with Silas, the smell of welding, the frustration and triumph of solving impossible engineering problems. He thought of the final project, the one that was supposed to be their masterpiece, the one that was left unfinished when Silas died of a sudden heart attack just months before Elena's accident. The Cypher, it was supposed to be a revolution, a car built with techniques and materials a decade ahead of its time. Everyone assumed it had been dismantled, the parts sold off with the rest of the estate. But Elias knew Silas. Silas was secretive, paranoid. He never would have left his life's work in plain sight. Marcus, Elias said slowly, a decision forming not in his mind, but in his gut. Can you handle the legal side? I want to see it. Of course, Marcus said, his voice instantly supportive. He had known Elias since college, had seen his brilliance firsthand, and had grieved with him when he chose to disappear. He never questioned his friend's choices, but he always hoped the spark he once knew would find a reason to reignite. I'll put in the inquiry. They're offering a single, 30-minute walkthrough for serious buyers tomorrow. And Elias, if you say there's something there, that's good enough for me. I'll front the capital. Consider it the best investment I'll ever make. The next day, Elias stood before the Ashcroft garage. It was even more derelict than he had imagined. The brick was stained with years of neglect, the windows were boarded up, and a large, rusted chain held the main bay door shut. He was met by a junior associate from Sterling Holdings, a young man in an ill-fitting suit who looked deeply uncomfortable. He reeked of condescension and cheap cologne. "You have 30 minutes, the associate said, checking his watch as he unlocked the heavy padlock. "The firm is not liable for any injury sustained on the premises. The structure is sold as is, where is. All contents are included in the sale, considered refuse." Elias nodded and stepped inside. The air was thick with the dust of a decade, and the only light came from the grimy skylights overhead. To the associate, the place was a tomb filled with junk. Piles of scrap metal, old machinery covered in tarps, stacks of rotting wooden crates. But Elias saw something else. His eyes, trained to see the soul in a machine, scanned the space. He saw the reinforced concrete floor, poured to withstand the weight of industrial presses. He saw the three-phase, high-voltage electrical conduits running along the ceiling, capable of powering heavy-duty fabrication equipment. He saw the custom-built ventilation system, designed to handle welding fumes and paint overspray. This was not a simple garage, it was a purpose-built automotive atelier. His gaze fell upon a large, shapeless form in the center of the main bay, completely hidden beneath a thick, canvas tarp. It was exactly where they had left it. The associate was tapping his foot impatiently near the door. Elias walked the perimeter, his boots crunching on debris. He ran a hand along the cold steel of a familiar English wheeling machine, its surface pitted but sound. He recognized a custom-built TIG welder in the corner. He did not need to lift the tarp. He did not need to open the crates. He knew. Silas had hidden his legacy in plain sight, disguised as junk, protected by the assumption that no one with the eyes to see its value would ever look here. He had built the perfect vault, a fortress of perceived worthlessness. Elias walked back to the door. "I'll take it," he said. The associate blinked, surprised by the swiftness of the decision. "You don't want to check under the covers?" he asked with a smirk. Elias simply looked at him, his gaze steady and unreadable. The silence was answer enough. The closing, if it could be called that, took place in a small, soulless conference room at the Sterling Holdings Tower. It was a world away from the honest grit of the garage. Elias, dressed in his usual clean work shirt and jeans, sat opposite David Chen and a corporate lawyer. Marcus was beside him, his calm presence a bulwark against the sterile corporate environment. The paperwork was minimal, a simple quitclaim deed. The price had been set at $750, a figure David had chosen as being just high enough to be taken seriously but low enough to guarantee a quick, uncomplicated sale. As Marcus reviewed the documents, the door opened, and Catherine Sterling swept in. She was on her way to a board meeting, dressed in a charcoal gray power suit that cost more than the car Elias drove. She did not intend to stop, but the sight of Elias, Southwest thoroughly out of place in her world, seemed to pique her curiosity like a strange piece of lint on her perfect corporate carpet. "This is the buyer for the Ashcroft property," she asked David, her tone making it clear she was talking about Elias as if he were an object. "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Elias Vance," David said, a hint of discomfort in his voice. Catherine's eyes flicked over Elias, taking in his worn boots, his simple clothes, his calloused hands resting on the table. Her mind, a machine of instant calculation and categorization, processed the data and reached a swift conclusion: inconsequential. She saw a simple laborer, a scrap hauler perhaps, who thought he was getting a deal on a pile of bricks and some junk metal. A small, sad man with small, sad ambitions. The thought brought a flicker of amusement to her lips, the closest she ever came to a smile in a professional setting. "Well," she said, directing her words into the air in front of Elias rather than at him. "Glad to have that liability off our books. I trust you have a plan for all the contents." The slight pause before the word contents was laden with derision. Elias did not rise to the bait. He simply met her gaze and held it. He did not speak. He did not need to. In his silence, there was a weight and a certainty that she, in her world of noise and frantic transactions, could not comprehend. For a fleeting second, her own certainty wavered. The man's stillness was unnerving. It was not the deference she expected. It was something else, something self-contained and absolute. But the moment passed. She was Catherine Sterling. He was nobody. She gave a curt nod to her lawyer. "Finalize it," she commanded, and swept out of the room, leaving the lingering scent of expensive perfume and dismissal. Marcus pushed the signed papers toward Elias. "It's done," he said quietly. "It's yours." Elias took the keys from David Chen. They felt heavy in his palm, heavier than their simple weight. They were not just keys to a building. They were keys to his past, and now, to his future. The first thing Elias did upon taking possession of the garage was not to inspect his prize, but to work. For 2 full days, he labored alone, methodically and tirelessly. He started by repairing the roof, patching the leaks that had stained the concrete floor. He replaced the broken panes in the skylights, and for the first time in a decade, clean, natural light flooded the cavernous space. He rewired the main breaker panel, his movements sure and economical, restoring power to the dormant machinery. He scrubbed the floors, washed the walls, and organized the scattered tools, creating an island of order in the sea of chaos. He was not just cleaning a building, he was reconsecrating a temple. Lily was there with him, helping in her own small way, handing him tools, sweeping dust into a pan, her quiet presence a constant, steadying force. Only when the space itself was sound, when the environment was worthy of the work to be done, did he finally turn his attention to the tarp in the center of the room. He walked over to it, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. He took a corner of the thick, dusty canvas, the material stiff with age. With a single, smooth pull, he drew it back. And there it was. The Ashcroft cipher. It rested on fabrication stands, its raw, unpainted aluminum body seeming to drink the light. It was incomplete, a ghost of a machine, but its form was breathtaking. The design was unlike anything Elias had ever seen before or since. It was a fusion of pre-war elegance and aerospace engineering, with lines that were both muscular and impossibly graceful. The chassis was a work of art, a monocoque of bonded and riveted alloys, a technique that was revolutionary at the time. The engine, a custom-designed V12, sat partially assembled on a stand nearby, its components laid out with surgical precision, each piece a testament to Silas Ashcroft's genius. But it was the crates that held the true treasure. Elias opened the first one. Inside, nestled in custom foam cutouts, were Silas's complete, hand-drawn schematics for the cipher. Every measurement, every tolerance, every metallurgical specification was detailed in his precise, architectural script. Another crate held his research notes, binders filled with aerodynamic calculations and material stress analyses. A third held the vehicle's logbooks, documenting every step of its creation. Sterling Holdings had not sold him a junked garage. They had sold him a masterpiece, complete with its instruction manual and birth certificate, for the price of a used appliance. They had discarded a king's ransom because they had mistaken the vault for the treasure. Elias ran his hand over the cool metal of the cipher's fender. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a duty to the men who had been his mentor and friend. This was not about money. It was about finishing the work. It was about honoring a legacy. He made 2 phone calls that evening. The first was to Ben Carter, a master machinist in his late 60s who could shape metal with the delicacy of a sculptor. The second was to Maria Flores, an upholstery artisan whose stitching was so perfect it looked as though it had grown from the leather. Both had worked with him and Silas in the old days. Both had been cast adrift after Silas's death, and were now working jobs far beneath their prodigious talents. "Ben," Elias said when the old machinist answered. "It's Elias Vance. I'm at the old shop. And I'm looking at the cipher." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then a choked, disbelieving whisper. "Is it? It's all here, Ben. The plans, the parts, the tools. Everything we need." "I'll be there in the morning," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. His call to Maria yielded the same result. He did not offer them contracts or salaries. He offered them something far more valuable, a chance to complete their life's best work. They did not hesitate. The next 4 months were a blur of focused, relentless effort. The Ashcroft garage, once a derelict tomb, became a hive of quiet, purposeful activity. There was no shouting, no wasted motion. Just the steady hum of machinery, the whisper of a TIG welder, the rhythmic tap of a shaping hammer. Elias, Ben, and Maria worked in a state of shared, unspoken understanding. They were a team forged in a shared past, reunited for a singular purpose. Elias was the conductor, orchestrating the entire restoration. He spent the first week simply studying Silas's notes, re-immersing himself in the project's complex soul. He reverse-engineered Silas's final intentions, solving design problems the old master had not yet committed to paper. He sourced materials with an almost fanatical devotion to authenticity, tracking down a specific alloy from a defunct aerospace supplier in Germany, a batch of hand-tanned leather from a family-run tannery in Italy. Ben Carter took charge of the engine and drivetrain. He worked with the patience of a watchmaker, measuring tolerances to the thousandth of an inch, balancing pistons and crankshafts until the entire assembly moved with the frictionless grace of a symphony. He treated the V-12 not as a collection of parts, but as a living thing, slowly coaxing it toward its full potential. Maria Flores transformed the stark cockpit into a work of art. She stretched and stitched the rich Italian leather over the custom-fabricated seats, her hands moving with a lifetime of practiced skill. She restored the gauges, polishing the chrome bezels and repainting the delicate needles by hand with a single hair brush. Lily was a constant, quiet presence throughout. She did her homework at her little desk, the sounds of the workshop her background music. She watched them work, her serious eyes absorbing every detail. She understood, in the profound way a child can, the importance of what her father was doing. This was more than fixing a car. This was an act of creation, an act of love. Slowly, miraculously, the Ashcroft cipher came to life. The raw aluminum body was painstakingly sanded and polished until it shone with a liquid, chrome-like luster. The engine, once a collection of inert metal, was installed in the chassis and, with a twist of a key, roared to life for the very first time. The sound was not a brutish roar, but a deep, resonant baritone, a sound of perfectly controlled power. The interior, once a bare metal shell, was now a sanctuary of leather and polished wood. On a cool autumn evening, exactly 119 days after Elias had bought the garage, they rolled the finished car out into the twilight. It was perfect. It was more than a car, it was a piece of rolling sculpture, a testament to the triumph of substance over surface, of skill over status. It was the physical manifestation of quiet competence. Marcus Thorne, who had watched the project with a sense of growing awe, used his connections to arrange a private viewing. He did not approach a dozen collectors, he approached only one. A reclusive Swiss industrialist named Alastair Finch, a man known for owning the most exclusive and historically significant automobiles in the world. Finch was a legend in the collecting world, a man whose judgment could define a car's legacy. He agreed to a viewing, his curiosity piqued by Marcus's cryptic description of a lost masterpiece. Finch arrived at the garage in an unassuming sedan, dressed not in a suit, but in simple, well-made trousers and a cashmere sweater. He was an elderly man with eyes that had seen everything. He did not speak for nearly an hour. He simply walked around the cipher, his movements slow and reverent. He ran a gloved hand over its flawless bodywork. He peered into the engine bay. He sat in the driver's seat and breathed in the scent of the leather. Elias, Ben, and Maria stood back, content to let the work speak for itself. Finally, Finch turned to Elias. His expression was one of profound respect. "In my life," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, "I have seen perhaps 5 automobiles that I would consider perfect. This is one of them. Silas Ashcroft was a genius. And you, sir," he said, his gaze locking with Elias's, "have done him justice. You have not merely restored his work, you have completed his symphony." He paused, then named a number. It was a figure so large, so astronomical, that it seemed to hang in the air, a silent thunderclap. The sale was concluded with a simple handshake. There would be no auction, no publicity. Finch did not buy cars for spectacle, he bought them for posterity. The money, Marcus confirmed a day later, had been transferred. Elias Vance, the quiet mechanic who fixed his neighbor's lawnmowers, was now a multi-millionaire. He paid Ben and Maria a sum that would ensure they would never have to work another day in their lives unless they chose to. He set up a trust for Lily that would guarantee her future 100 times over. And he bought the industrial lot next to the garage, and the one next to that. He was building something. He had founded Ashcroft Legacy Works. The news broke not in the financial pages, but in a small, highly respected automotive journal. The article was a sensation in the cloistered world of high-end car collecting. It spoke of the miraculous rediscovery and completion of the legendary Ashcroft cipher. It did not name Elias, referring only to a discreet consortium of artisans, but it mentioned the car had been found in the long-abandoned Ashcroft garage, recently sold by Sterling Holdings. And it quoted anonymous experts who estimated the car's private sale value at north of $20 million. David Chin saw the article on a Tuesday morning. He read it once, then twice, a cold dread creeping up his spine. He connected the dots: the as-is sale, the quiet buyer in the work clothes, the dismissive price. He cross-referenced the property records with the name in the article. It all lined up. He felt physically ill. He printed out the article and walked the longest walk of his life, down the hushed corridor to Catherine Sterling's office. He placed the article on her desk without a word. She read it, her expression shifting from mild annoyance at the interruption, to confusion, to a dawning, horrified comprehension. The color drained from her face. She looked at the picture of the gleaming, perfect automobile, then at the text mentioning Sterling Holdings. She looked at the estimated value. She remembered the quiet, unassuming men in the conference room. She remembered her own smug condescension. $750, she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Her disbelief quickly curdled into a white-hot rage, a fury born of humiliation. It was not just about the money. It was about the colossal scale of her misjudgment. She, Catherine Sterling, the woman who could spot a flaw in a balance sheet from a mile away, had personally signed off on the disposal of a $20 million asset for less than the price of a dinner for two at a restaurant she frequented. She had been so blinded by her own arrogance, her focus on big-picture metrics, that she had tripped over a diamond because she'd mistaken it for a piece of gravel. She turned her fury on David. Did you do any due diligence on this? Any at all? Did you even look inside the building? She seethed, conveniently forgetting that she herself had forbidden any such delays. You said to liquidate it immediately, ma'am, David said, his voice quiet but firm. You said the value was in its absence from the balance sheet. Her eyes narrowed. To be contradicted with her own words was the ultimate offense. Clean out your desk, David, she said, her voice dangerously calm. You're finished, he did not argue. He simply nodded and walked out, a strange sense of relief washing over him. He was free. Catherine's fury cooled into a cold, calculating resolve. She would fix this. She would not allow this mechanic to get the better of her. Her researchers quickly discovered the name of the new entity, Ashcroft Legacy Works, with Elias Vance listed as the sole proprietor. She learned of his background, his connection to Silas Ashcroft. The picture became agonizingly clear. It was not luck, it was expertise. He had known exactly what he was buying. She arranged a meeting. This time, she would go to him. She would force him onto her ground by invading his. She arrived at the garage in her chauffeured Bentley, a stark symbol of her world clashing with his. But the garage she found was not the derelict hovel she remembered from the property file. It was a pristine, state-of-the-art facility. The old brick building was now flanked by two new, modern structures. Through the large glass bay doors, she could see a team of skilled technicians working on other vintage vehicles, each one a classic worth a fortune. The place hummed with quiet, profitable competence. She found Elias in the main workshop, standing over a set of blueprints. He was dressed in the same simple work clothes, but he now wore them with the unmistakable air of a man completely in command of his domain. Mr. Vance, she began, her tone clipped and authoritative. We need to talk. Elias looked up from his work, his expression calm. He simply waited. You have an impressive operation here, she said, gesturing vaguely at the workshop. Clearly, you have a certain talent. Sterling Holdings is always looking to partner with unique enterprises. I am prepared to make you a very generous offer to acquire Ashcroft Legacy Works. We can provide the capital and the corporate structure to scale this into a global brand. She was offering to buy back her own mistake at a premium, framing it as a favor. Elias wiped his hands on a rag. I'm not for sale, Miss Sterling, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the finality of a vault door closing. I have all the capital I need. And I have the one thing you don't have, the work itself. Her facade of control cracked. This was a trick. You deceived my company. I bought a property you were selling, Elias corrected her gently. You set the price. You signed the papers. You saw a liability. I saw a legacy. We were both right, from our own perspectives. He paused, then delivered the final, devastating blow. I've since acquired 2 more of your peripheral liability properties. The old Kellerman textile mill and the Durant foundry. My research suggests you'll be hearing about them in the news in about 6 months' time. Catherine stared at him, speechless. The full scope of her failure washed over her. It wasn't a single mistake. It was a systemic flaw in her entire worldview. She had built an empire on the principle that only what could be measured on a spreadsheet had value. This quiet man had just proven her entire life's philosophy wrong. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted. She had come to his turf to intimidate him, and she was leaving utterly defeated. The fallout was catastrophic for her. The story of the Ashcroft cipher, now linked to her name and her monumental blunder, became a cautionary tale in the financial world. It was a story of corporate hubris, of a CEO so focused on the horizon she couldn't see the gold at her feet. Her board grew restless. Shareholders grew nervous. Sterling Holdings stock began to slide. For months after their meeting, Catherine Sterling found herself facing the ultimate humiliation. Her company's most promising new venture, a foray into aerospace manufacturing, was failing. They lacked the in-house expertise for the high-tolerance, bespoke fabrication the contracts demanded. Their suppliers were failing to meet the specifications. There was only one firm in the region with the proven skill, the specialized equipment, and the reputation for perfection required to save the project and, with it, her company. She returned to the Ashcroft garage. This time, she did not arrive in a Bentley, but in a modest town car. She was not there to make an offer, but to make a pitch. She, Catherine Sterling, CEO of Sterling Holdings, had to formally request a meeting with Elias Vance to bid for a contract from Ashcroft Legacy Works. She had to present her company's needs, her timelines, her budget, and hope that he would accept. She had to work for him. Elias listened to her presentation in the same conference room where she had once dismissed him. It was now his conference room, in his building. He reviewed her proposal, asked a few pointed technical questions that demonstrated a far deeper understanding of her business than she had of his, and finally agreed. But it would be on his terms. His quality standards, his timeline, his price. She had no choice but to accept. Her company's survival now depended on the skill of the men she had written off as a nobody. That evening, long after the last of his employees had gone home, Elias was alone in the quiet workshop. The lights were dimmed, and the great machine stood silent. Lily was asleep on a small cot he kept in his office. He was not looking at financial reports or planning corporate strategy. He was sitting at his workbench, a small block of pine in one hand and a carving knife in the other. With the same patient, methodical precision he had used to restore a multi-million-dollar engine, he was carving a small, perfect wooden car for his daughter. He had built a new empire, not of stock prices and leveraged assets, but of tangible, beautiful things. He was wealthier and more powerful than he had ever imagined, yet he remained fundamentally unchanged. His victory was not in Catherine Sterling's defeat, but in the quiet satisfaction of his work, in the steady rhythm of his own life, and in the love for the little girl who was his true north. He had not sought revenge, he had simply pursued excellence. And in the end, that had been the most devastating and complete form of vindication imaginable. He had proven that true value is not something you acquire or liquidate. It is something you build, with your own 2 hands.